Hello folks, and welcome back to my channel. Today we are continuing my series on stretching piercings with talking about one of my favorite piercings I've ever stretched, my tongue piercing. That's right, we're talking about tongue stretching. Now, if you're interested in hearing about my personal experience with stretching my tongue piercing, I'll link that video here. You can go watch about my whole tongue stretching journey, but for today, we're going to be talking about what goes into stretching a tongue piercing and how to do it safely. Now, as a baseline, stretching a tongue is the same as stretching any other piercing, gradually enlarging the channel of a piercing in order to accommodate a larger size. That's the basic foundation of stretching any piercings: earlobes, septums, lip piercings, and yes, tongue piercings. Now, where stretching a tongue piercing differs is that we're stretching a muscle. In fact, tongue piercings are almost the only time where we are stretching a muscle in this way. Midline tongue piercings are the most common to stretch, and they are pierced through the septum of the tongue. Yes, your tongue has a septum. Take a look at this diagram. We can see here the septum of the tongue is the connective tissue between muscles. So much like when we do a septum piercing in our nose and we're piercing through that soft connective tissue that is at the tip of the nose, that's our sweet spot for a septum piercing, it's kind of the same thing when we're doing a centered tongue piercing. We're placing that piercing through the septum, that soft connective tissue between the quadrants of muscles of the tongue, and that's where that piercing goes. This does mean that the first few sizes when stretching your tongue piercing are pretty easy. I vividly remember being I was probably like 15 at the time, and I was curious about maybe stretching my tongue, so I tried to see if a 12 gauge bar would fit in after I'd been wearing a 14 gauge for a little bit, and it just slid right in, like perfect natural stretching. Very, very easy stretch. I would later go on to get my tongue re-pierced at a larger size and jumpstart the stretching process, but those small early stretches can be really easy, and I've assisted lots of clients with stretching their tongue the first few sizes, and we can often just naturally stretch through those. After the first few sizes though, that's where things get a little dicey. See, that septum of the tongue is that connective tissue between sections of muscle. So once you get to a certain size, for most folks it's around a 10 or an 8 gauge, you've filled the septum. Now your jewelry is just right up against the muscle, and those muscles are pressing in on it. They don't want to stretch. They're muscles. They're designed to take up and occupy this space. Those muscles can kind of press down on the jewelry and make stretching very difficult. Now, aside from that, something that I experienced stretching my tongue, and something that many people that I've spoken to and many clients I've assisted with this process have experienced, is what feels like a band of tissue in the middle of the tongue that is very resistant to stretching. So for many of my sizes, it would go in very easily from the top, it could go in very easily from the bottom, but right in the middle of my tongue, it felt like there was a tight rubber band, and every single time I would stretch past about a 10 or an 8 gauge, there was this popping sensation when I got the next size through that band of tissue, and I am not gonna lie to you, it was pretty uncomfortable. Now, my working theory as a professional body piercer and not a medical professional or dentist or an oral surgeon or anything like that is the tongue is made up of more than just two muscles. It's made up of sectors of muscles, as we can see in this diagram here. And I think there may be a band of connective tissue between those upper and lower muscles that is just a denser, more connective tissue that's not very stretchy or flexible. And that's my theory of what we're running into when we're stretching. But there's definitely something there, because I sure as hell felt it stretching my tongue. I've felt it helping other people stretch their tongue piercings, and I've spoken to a lot of folks with stretched tongues who have had a similar sensation and a similar experience. Now, because of this factor of this potential band of tissue, and also just the fact that muscles really don't want to stretch, you may need tapers to assist you with the stretching process with the tongue piercing. With earlobes, things can naturally loosen up over time. We generally really do not need tapers to stretch as long as we're giving it enough time and patience. But we're also just stretching soft, fatty tissue. We are not stretching a muscle when we're stretching our ears. So when we decide to stretch our tongues, it is a completely different ballgame as far as how that stretching process is going to go. And because those muscles want to press right back in, and because of some of the connective tissues of the tongue, you may not be able to just naturally stretch. You may have to use tapers to assist you with stretching this. Now, this also means that very often when you're stretching your tongue, you can cause micro tears. I definitely had stretches for my tongue, safe stretches, where I waited 8 months in between sizes. I was going like I had the right jewelry, I had the right sizes, everything was great, and I felt those micro tears happen when I stretched, and it was unpleasant. So that is a risk that we are encountering when we're stretching a piercing like this. And due to that risk, stretching your tongue piercing can come with some really fun swelling. Now, because of the concern with micro tears and swelling, going with 1 millimeter or 1.5 millimeter increments is really important when you're stretching your tongue. Please, please, God, do not skip sizes on your tongue. Do not try and stretch more than 1 millimeter at a time. I did that once when I was younger and stretching my tongue, and I talk about it in my video about my tongue stretching journey, but that shit was awful. It was so bad. Do not put yourself in the same situation I put myself in. Go slow, get half sizes, be really cautious and really conscientious with this. As far as timing goes between stretches, I suggest a minimum of 3 to 5 months, but sometimes as long as 6 to 8, depending on how your tongue is taking to the stretching process, what size you're trying to stretch to, and just kind of how things feel. But don't be afraid to be patient and wait longer. If anything doesn't feel right, feels weird, feels wrong, please don't force the stretch. Now, even with the safest and most perfect stretch where everything just goes through super easily and super great, tongue stretching can still often come with a lot of swelling. So I would caution anyone who's considering stretching their tongue piercing to be prepared for the fact that every single time you stretch, you very well may encounter swelling to the level that it was when you first got it pierced, which can be a lot of swelling. So when I was stretching my tongue, I liked to be prepared with lots of cold water bottles in the fridge so that I could do cool water rinses and just kind of have cold water to sip on. My favorite treat post a tongue stretch was Rita's water ice. I would have the cherry water ice, which definitely made my mouth look like it was super bloody and scary because it turned everything bright red. Really, really added on to the experience of showing people my freshly stretched up tongue piercing. People loved it for sure. But just like a nice cold treat, like a water ice or an ice pop or ice cream, something that's gonna help soothe that swelling on your tongue, and just kind of be prepared for the fact that swelling is a very real concern when stretching your tongue, and no matter how big you're stretching it, to what size, be prepared that that swelling may occur. Now, like when you got it freshly pierced, that swelling may cause a really delightful lisp when you're speaking. It may cause some discomfort with talking and eating. So prepare for that as well when you're thinking about the timeline for your stretches, and also maybe consider having softer foods or easier to eat foods on hand. Now, when it comes to stretching your tongue, jewelry is an important part of this conversation. In the beginning sizes, really the best option is going to be some implant grade titanium barbells. They're hypoallergenic, they're implant grade, they're safe to be worn in the mouth long term, and they are quite frankly the most affordable option through those smaller sizes. And I know you might be thinking, but Lynn, a bunch of solid titanium barbells are not really that affordable. If you're looking for affordable, don't get into tongue stretching. We are talking about enlarging a piercing that is in your mouth that can potentially cause some really serious damage to your teeth and gums. Tongue piercings at a standard size are already very well known for causing people to chip teeth, damage teeth, play with it, and wear down on their gums. When we are talking about making this bigger and bigger, we are talking about taking a larger and larger risk with our teeth and gums. And one of the best ways we can minimize that risk is by using properly fitted high quality jewelry. So this is not an area where I would skimp or try and get cheaper jewelry to make it more affordable. Invest in jewelry that is going to be safe for your teeth and safe for your mouth. So small sizes until about, I would say, like a 6 or a 4, you're going to be going with titanium barbells. As things get larger, I would encourage you to consider trying M&M ends that look like this, or opal cabs that are going to be flatter and lower profile than big beads, and a little bit less likely to catch and snag on your teeth and gums while you're eating and talking and such. Once you get large enough, my personal favorite thing to use for stretching tongue piercings is glass plugs. And Glassware Studios has absolutely perfected their design for glass plugs for stretched tongues. They're who produced all of the plugs that I wore when my tongue was stretched. Here are some pictures of some of the cute ones I had. They can do fun, fancy colors, cute inserts, and they can also just keep them very simple and plain if that's what you prefer the look of. But these glass pieces have a very small, low profile domed top that doesn't really get caught on your teeth or while you're eating or drinking. I can't express how freaking comfortable these were to wear. And then they make the bottom with either no flare or micro flare. When I was still stretching, I would get them no flare, so they would be easier to stretch with, but that meant having to deal with an O-ring on the bottom. And let me tell you what, you're gonna swallow a lot of O-rings. It's kind of annoying. So once I got to my goal size, or once I was staying at a size for a while, I would have them make them for me with a micro flare on the bottom. So it's this little rounded piece on the bottom, kind of like bead-esque, but it's really just like a gentle flare that's designed to be worn in your tongue. And it allows you to hold things in place much better, but you can still pop it in and out if you need to remove it and clean it and such. Out of all of the metal and all of the jewelry and all of the material I've worn in my mouth, these glass tongue plugs were like the easiest thing to keep clean. Sometimes you take your metal jewelry out and you need to like scrub at that stuff to get plaque or tartar off if some has been allowed to build up. The glass plug, you could just wipe it right away. You could brush it right away. These were so easy to keep clean and maintain my oral hygiene. I cannot recommend them strongly enough. And of course, just as a reminder, if you use code LYNN with Glassware Studios, you will get 20% off your first order. So if you're thinking about getting some fun custom tongue plug stuff, there's a discount code for you. You can also look into getting Delrin or PTFE, which are body-safe plastics that can be made for large gauge pieces, and I suggest Stonewolf adornments and South Shore adornments for those pieces. But please, please, please do not cut corners on your jewelry. Be really careful with what you're putting in your mouth for this, because you do not want to mess up your teeth and gums. Fortunately for me, for the length of time that I wore my stretched tongue piercing, I never had any tooth or gum damage. So I am very grateful for that, and I attribute a lot of it to being smart about the jewelry I wore and being cautious and not playing with it. If you've ever considered stretching your tongue piercing, it was definitely my favorite piercing that I stretched. I enjoyed the journey so much. I thought it was such a fun piercing to have, and I cannot tell you how desperately I miss my stretched tongue piercing. It was just such a wonderful thing. If you're interested in that stretching process, hopefully this video gives you a little bit more information about what to expect, timelines to take between piercings, and also helps you understand a bit of the anatomy of the tongue so you get what's kind of happening when we're stretching it, and why this stretching process is so unique. If you'd like to learn more, I do have a whole blog post about tongue piercings on my website. I do have a whole blog post about just regular tongue piercings, but also stretching tongue piercings on my website, which I'll link in the description box down below. Thanks so much for hanging out and letting me chat with y'all today, and I'm sure we'll talk again soon. Bye.